Hello, and welcome to the South Coast Artists Index, where artists, performers, and writers, as well as curators, directors, and supporters, anyone with ties to the creative community, drops by to introduce themselves to you. We'll talk about their beginnings, their vision, their passion, and so much more. The South Coast Artists Index podcast is brought to you in part by Heavenly Spirits, who invites you to celebrate the art of life and creative communities everywhere.
Hi, this is Ron Fortier with another episode of the In Focus podcast brought to you by the Artist Index. And today we have a painter. And as per usual, I'm going to let our guests introduce themselves and spell their names. Well, they do have more than one name. We'll just take it from there, as we always do. Yes?
I'm Chris Page, CHRISPAGE.
That's simple and short enough, isn't it?
I like that way.
So, Chris, tell us a little bit about yourself.
So I've been an artist since Lord knows when. I started getting serious in high school and then started actually having my own independent studio almost directly out of high school, even though I did do a little bit of work at the museum school. And my work comes out of what I would call the abstract expressionist color field painting sort of modality. I was growing up in Boston, and at the time that I was 18, 21, it was when the Museum of Fine Arts was deeply, deeply invested in color field painting. And so that was what I primarily saw. That's what I primarily encountered in my education. And so that's what I come out of. And probably it must be about 20 years ago now, I had taken a trip up to the Arctic. And out of that experience, I became more deeply wedded to landscape than I had previously been. And so ever since then, my work has been sort of a merger between color field painting and some sort of nature reference.
That's really interesting. On 2 points. Number one, what years were you at the MFA?
It would have been 72, 73. I was only there for a year. Okay. And then I moved out to the Amherst, Massachusetts area.
Okay. I was there in 71 for their summer placement program. I was lucky enough to have been selected, but even back then, the tuition was eye-popping compared to going to SMU, Southeastern Massachusetts University. Where the tuition was $2,400 for all 4 years.
Oh my God.
Combined, yeah. And the other thing is that my MFA was based on pretty much everything that you said. It's almost like a doppelganger effect for me, because my MFA thesis was called Fire and Ice, and it was about the Arctic. It was about the Arctic whaling expedition of 1871. Which really fascinated the hell out of me, and same thing, color field, and it's kind of weird, kind of nice though, to know that there's somebody else in the world who's got the same brain, Yeah.
Yeah, it was interesting because I certainly grew up with some of those sort of, shipping and whaling stories, and then when I was about to go up, I read a whole bunch of stuff on it. But going up, it was more the expansiveness and the way the land, excuse me, the land would merge with the sky. We were out in the ice flows, and so there would be these shapes of the melting ice on the top of the ice, the clouds, and then the mountains, and they all merged into sort of a single, undifferentiated whole. And that's what really grabbed my interest, because it picked up the sort of overall painterly field that I had been so used to. And so I was able to bring that back and try to go after that for quite a few years.
Now the color palette must have morphed from, oh my God, from, monochromatic blacks and white and gray to, and I've never been up there, but I have seen the Kennebec River when it was icing out, when they had the January thaw, or what the old timers used to call Fool's Spring, with these massive pillars of ice that were like crystalline blue. I mean, like almost like sapphires. So
what we came across was and this was especially true when we were traveling back from the ice flows, is it looked more like you were in the tropics.
In the what?
In the tropics.
Okay, I thought that's what you said.
So
There was like a little hiccup in the flow.
So the something happens when the sun hits the ice crystals, it makes it look like tropical turquoise.
Wow.
Then but of course, any land you come across is this like super dark basalt rock outcroppings. And so it's at that time of year, a bizarre mix of blues and greens and grays and blacks. But most of it was in the turquoise, some towards that blue you were talking about. So I spent a good couple of years working with turquoise and silver paint sticks, because rather than wanting to go into gray as a sort of flat, dense, earthy color, I used silver instead of gray.
Yeah.
It never looked silver because when you mix it with paint, it actually turns a kind of gray, but it wasn't a standard gray.
I used silver for the first time, and I couldn't believe I was doing it, but something in my head just kept saying, use the silver. When I did my Moby Dick triptych, which was a 12 by 5 a monster, and it's absolutely amazing. It's almost like addictive with the silver for some reason. So now that I'm saying this out loud, I'm thinking I'm gonna try the gold next and see what happens. How were you drawn to the Arctic? I mean, that's
it comes out of bird watching.
Bird watching.
So yes, so I have and sort of continue to be a somewhat avid bird watcher, and so we had a friend, and one of the people that we were all fairly close to's husband used to study the sex life of seaweed, and yes, I know.
Okay, I just drew a total blank.
Yeah, no, it's just, but that all caught our attention.
Yeah.
And so he knew a guide up there. And so a friend came to us one day and said, haven't you always wanted to go to the Arctic? And I kind of said, yeah. And my wife kind of looked like, are you for real?
Do I know you?
Yeah, so we planned this trip. And we went up for about 10 days and camped on the ice at the edge of the ice flow and watched the narwhals and the birds as they were coming through. It was mid-June. So it was 24-hour light, and it was pretty spectacular opportunity.
Wow. Did you ever have any feelings of like a previous life up there?
No, but it's a space and an opportunity that felt very, very unique and almost out of normal experience.
Mm-hmm.
Partially it's the harshness of the landscape, and part of it is the you're in a totally different cultural environment. So it was really remarkable. And I remember meeting somebody who had been up there before. They were coming to meet some explorer who had gone up to the North Pole and was just coming back, and we intersected with this group in the airport. And it was really clear from talking to her that the Arctic has a totally unique aura to it. And I would confirm that. I mean, there's something about hanging out at 1 a.m, all the grown-ups have gone to bed. The kids are running around town. And it's just a very, very different world.
Were you up in Barrow or?
We were straight north of here, on Baffin Island.
Oh, wow.
And so we were, I think, what was it? Several hundred miles above the Arctic Circle. So we had 24-hour a day sunlight.
The Bay of Baffin, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's funny. Most people don't know much about Baffin Island, but it's mostly where the Inuit art that we know of comes from.
Did you read Shackleton at any point in time?
I think I might have, or I certainly know the story of Shackleton.
Yeah. When I was preparing for the MFA, I mean, there was no internet back then, and it happened to be in a bookstore and looked down. There's it's like, well, it's the Arctic, So actually, it was the Antarctic, I believe, in this case. Seal Island, yeah, that's Antarctic. And I said, well, what the heck? So it was a phenomenal story. But the weird thing is every time I went to go turn a page, I kind of already knew what was on the next page, and it made me feel as though I had lived a similar kind of existence or something. And I did a self-portrait with the snow goggles and the big fur parka and the whole 9 yards, and it's just kind of weird. This is really interesting. I mean, this connectivity. I mean, it just doesn't happen all.
No, you don't. You're not going to find a lot of. There are not a lot of Arctic fanatics.
Yeah.
I don't know if you read. What's his name? Is it Barry Lopez? Arctic Dreams. He wrote the book Arctic Dreams.
No, I'm going to write that
down.
Yeah,
you should check that out, because that made the Arctic a little more popular, because he's such a famous nature writer.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that might be his major book.
The only other person that I know of personally that is a childhood friend who was a child when I was, he was. I always say I knew him before he was born, because my mom and dad were friends with his mom and dad. John Robson, who went up, into Alaska and did some photography up there. I think he's down in Siam or Bali or someplace now. I think he was in Vietnam for one point in time.
Of this northern stuff.
Oh, he's for a Norwegian guy, you'd think his blood would crave, cold, but I guess it's the opposite. And he had some phenomenal photographs of up there, and it's just something that's really intriguing about it. I don't know why. So when you left the MFA, the School of Museum and Fine Arts, where did you go to, or was that the end of your academic?
We went out to the Amherst, Mass area. My wife was going to UMass. We ended up building a house with a studio in it. Forgot to leave the valley, as they say, and had been there for 50 years until this July. I just got down to the South Coast in July.
Wow.
My wife had been down a couple of years working, but we finally got our house sold. And
any family connections down here?
I actually grew up for a while in Marion.
Okay.
My uncle had a house in Marion, and so I was living with my aunt and uncle for a while.
No, any other roots? Because the only page that's popping into my head right now is when I used to work for the Office of Historic Preservation way back when. There was a J.H.W. Page. He was an attorney. I don't know if you're familiar with, it's typical New England where Converse Photo used to be.
From the Page side, that's all a Philadelphia family.
Okay.
My grandmother, mother were Whitneys, and that's the Massachusetts end of how I happened to be here.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so
that's interesting.
It was George Whitney in Marion, and
So before I go on to your standard artist painter questions, so how many of Torrey Peterson's how many check marks do you have in your Torrey Peterson guidebook?
Oh God,
are you like
I don't even
over 50%?
I have done so many different sort of listings, and about 10 years ago, I sort of stopped doing the listing as a formal pursuit.
Mhm.
I now kind of will, I'm sure I could figure it out, but it's probably over 200, but I'm really not sure. I mean, I haven't done extensive traveling. I've certainly gone out to the,
Mhm.
Arizona, a little California. And I've chased a few birds, but I'm not an avid chaser.
Okay. Yeah.
But I do, lose time birding on a pretty regular basis.
Yeah. Yeah. Other than the obvious, what got you hooked on birding?
We were vacationing up in Grand Manan Island, which is an island off the coast
Yeah,
of Maine.
I know. That was one of my brother's principal properties. He was Maine Fish and Wildlife
Oh, okay.
for
So,
12
it's
years or so.
Canadian island off the coast. And
Yeah.
we started to vacation there and we went on a bird watching trip. And there were these seabirds that were there as well. And just somehow watching them cruise across the waves just was like, yeah, there's something there I want. And then I got a pair of binoculars and started chasing things down like a little crazy person.
Yeah, his principal job was he was oh my God, he had like multiple titles, but his principal job was to ferry ornithologists from the mainland to the islands.
Oh,
And
okay.
back in 2015, before I expatriated to Portugal, um, I went up there to visit him with my grandson, and it was during a tern census, which I had never even
Ah,
heard of.
right.
And it was amazing. And it was kind of weird because when I got off this boat, he gives my grandson and I these yellow flags, similar to those things that they put in your lawn when they put chemicals on it. And he said, okay, just hold it over your head and just keep waving it. Why? You'll see. And so we start walking to actually his daughter, my niece, had got herself a residency there without his knowledge because she didn't want his help. And she was in the lighthouse, which he helped restore. So there's like a lot of history there. And so, you start walking along the paths, and he said, you got to be careful because they nest everywhere.
Yeah.
And so you got to keep waving the flag. I said, why? He says, you'll see. And they feel threatened. They're afraid that you're going to step on their babies or on their nests, and they just start hammering at you. I mean,
Oh, that'll happen on Horseneck Beach. If you
yeah,
try to walk Horseneck Beach at high tide during the lease turn season,
yeah.
they'll come screaming down at you, and I don't think they'll hit you. Maybe they will, but they'll definitely poop on you.
I thought pooping would be much more effective than just screeching and trying to hit you.
Yeah, well, the screeching, even though I know it's coming, startles me, and it's like, what the heck do you want me to do? I'm like, I can't get in the water. It's pretty funny.
Yeah,
I'm sure
it's
there've been
my
a
island
lot
kind of
of
thing.
people down there that had their, really like,
Yeah. So you're resettling into the area. I think I had met you at Troy Hendrickson's opening. No? Yes?
maybe, I'm not sure. I can't remember which artist, but it was at
It was at the Co-Creative Center,
New Bedford Art Museum.
New Bedford Art Museum. Okay. Hmm. Okay. Um, yeah, I mean,
I forget which show.
after a while, I mean,
Yeah,
'cause you know how it is. You've got to socialize. As painters,
yeah.
you just can't keep holed up in your studio unless you've got a really good gallery hammering the world for you, Um, and you get to meet a lot of people, and it was great about it. It's like, of course, I met you and Troy when he had his opening. He lives in France. He's a guy we check him out on one of our podcasts. Um, talk about a circuitous career. So he's a writer and a painter and living in Paris, life sucks, right? So you're getting settled back in. Any exhibits coming up? Any exhibits just behind you now?
I
Big
have a
shift in work.
exhibit currently I am part of an exhibit at the New Bedford Art Museum called Spirit of Place.
Okay. I'm gonna have to check that out. For some reason, I missed that one, and I've got to go see
Yeah, I think
Suzanne
the
anyway.
promotion for the opening, because it was not a standard AHA night, didn't quite happen as much promotion as it could have. And
What was the
so
name of the title? What was the title of the show again?
called Spirit of Place.
Spirit of Place.
And it's,
Okay.
I think, 5 or 6 artists. One person is from Ireland, and she did a sort of a installation piece. And then there's a couple of photographers who had done a project a few years back where they'd gone around the country and photographed places. They both would agree and then photograph the same place. And it originally had been a book where they each had a photograph of theirs on the same page. And this time, the way Suzanne had done it, they're separated. So more to represent each artist's vision. Oh, what's his name? New Bedford artist that works with rope.
I know who you're talking about. Buchanan.
Yes.
Yes.
So he's got some.
Is it? I think it's Alexander, but he goes by a different.
Alex, I think. Just
yeah.
I think that. So, and my work is a mix of a couple of what had started out as small paintings, and then I photographed them and blew them up much bigger. And
did you you know, when you blew them up, did you have them you know, photo reproduction, like stretch canvas and then manipulate that?
No, what I did was it was a really funny thing. I had just rented my studio, and it was coming up to an open studio. I think it was a Christmas open studio last year.
Are you at the Hatch?
I'm in the Hatch Street building.
Hatch Street,
They have, and so they do these big open studio shows. And I needed something to put on the walls. And I had brought down some of my old big paintings, but I wanted something that represented my exploration of the South Coast, because I've been coming down for, you know, a few days here and there for a year or so. And been doing some work based on that up in my Amherst area studio before we came down. And so I just went down to the local print shop. I happen to live in Somerset, and Riverside Arts is right down.
Yeah.
So I just went down there, and they have these printers they usually use just for blueprints. But you can get
cyanotypes.
Yeah, I think they're just inkjets of some sort. But you know, to get a 3x5, you know, piece of paper printed out is like $10. And so it's like, okay, I'll do a couple of those, and you know, I would take what I was doing at the time was taking images and then overpainting them. And I was working on, you know, like 8.5 by 11 paper. And so I had all of these random images. Some of them are just sort of like these fields of chaos, and others were more slightly organized based on watching the waves dissipate as they moved out. And so I would take these random things and join them a top and a bottom. I know we only have a podcast, but I know you can see me at this moment, and behind me is one of those pieces.
That's exactly what I thought as you were speaking. Yeah. And by the way, in your podcast blog post, so you have a companion blog post that goes along with this podcast. All of your work will be under you in a little gallery. Yeah. But yeah, I was looking at it from the very beginning, because again, there's a lot of I can totally understand what you're doing, which is, it's wonderful and weird all at the same time. Especially the piece to your left, the small piece. That one is intriguing.
That piece is actually based on walking this summer on Gooseberry Island and encountering the seaweed piles that had been, I'm assuming they are there all the time. The sand covers them up, and the sand had gotten washed away and was revealing these like 2 foot tall, weird forms of seaweed. And I started photographing them like from ground level, so they looked like almost mountains.
Mhm.
And I'd also started to get interested in tightening up my sort of form and geometry into a slightly tighter format. And so that's based on this notion of accumulation from doing these walks on Gooseberry.
That's really, I mean, it's rare that I bump into another painter. It's kind of weirdly wonderful to be able to get into somebody else's head and understand. I understand what they're doing because that's kind of how I think or whatever. I've got a friend named, Bob Brodesky. It's the same thing. I can look at his work, and even though our work looks nothing alike, I can really sense what he is doing, and he's like, that's just like way too weird. But it's like, I don't know, it's just kind of a cool thing to do, and as you can see from behind me, those are two of my Arctic series.
Yes.
They're not meant to be photorealistic. They're not meant to, in some cases, even to be historical in any sense, except for the fact that there was an New Bedford Arctic whaling disaster. It started off as an expedition, ended up as a disaster. It could have been worse. I think they lost over 30 vessels, but they removed 1,200 souls off of those boats. They didn't lose one life. And we're talking men, women, and children, because by that time, a lot of wives were going to sea with their husbands. Yeah. So this idea about this sense of the spirit of place is really a truism, I guess. There's a book written by Pascal Mercier, and I've mentioned it several times on this show already, The Night Train to Lisbon. And they made a movie out of it with Jeremy Irons. And there's this fictitious character that was so impactful in both the book and the movie that people think this guy actually existed. He was a doctor. He grew up in during the Salazar regime, which was a fascist government, the same government my mother grew up under. And he wanted to be a writer. He was a philosopher writer. And he talks about this sense of we always leave a little bit of ourselves behind in this, in the landscape. I think it's just so true that, but we also, we leave a little bit of ourselves in that landscape because we take it with us. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think for me, what I do in my work is I visit the same spot over and over and over again.
Yeah.
Hoping to get to some point where I start to know it. Not in the sense of, oh yeah, I've been to XYZ, but almost I become XYZ. So for all of the work in Spirit of Place, it's all based on walking either at Horseneck Beach or Gooseberry Island.
Yeah, those are two of my favorite
relationship
places.
to Horseneck is much more the rhythm of the waves, the sound of the waves. There's a couple of pieces that use spectrogram recordings of wave sounds. One exclusively so, which creates this sort of almost field painting kind of noise expression. Another one where I've combined that along with photographs of a wave. So I will do almost anything to not fall into, oh, there's a wave painter or a wave photographer.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Because I see
Um,
you see so many of these on Instagram, and it's like, I don't know.
oh, and the challenge is, and it's something that I've been aware of in my work for a while, is am I willing to go to those places, especially in terms of landscape, that most contemporary artists and art theory have absolutely no interest in whatsoever? And can I go there and still make work interesting,
Yeah.
uh, and make it relevant? Because I find that landscape continues to be a powerful pull on my existence, my spiritual life, especially.
Let's going back to field painting, field color painting, and the abstract expressionism again. And because of that sentimentality or mindset or whatever, one of the biggest challenges to me as an abstract expressionist, and I was an abstract expressionist for like 40 years. And I set myself up with a silly goal. It's silly because it's impossible to paint nothing. Okay. And the horizon, I'm just the goddamn horizon. And
Yeah.
what the horizon is a horizontal line. The moment you put that into an abstract piece, that's it. You're screwed. You've got a landscape on. There's nothing you can do to get away from it. You know, and that makes it all the more difficult. But I shifted over like Phil Guston. I mean, I was kind of inspired by that and a bunch of other things all simultaneously. And the the work is slower because I could crank out my abstracts much faster, obviously,
Ah,
not because they were thoughtless or whatever, but it's a whole different approach.
yeah.
And in the morning walks, I said, oh, I don't know how long it's been. I haven't even looked. I started to, I live next to Fort Phoenix. It's only a short walk to the fort every morning. And I go out there and I don't know when I took the first photograph, but there's just something interesting about it. It's like, are you going to use it? I don't know. People say, oh, you should make paintings out of these. And I get repulsed by that thought because my instructors would always say, why would you make a painting of a photograph? The real challenge if you're going to be doing landscape is going to be, being plein air,
I
right?
have been asking myself that question
Yeah.
because my work, when I go take walks, I must always bring my camera. And I am constantly struggling between when is something best left as a photograph and
Yeah.
how do you then let yourself be. I will never say that I'm a photographer.
Yeah.
I'm an artist that uses photography. You'll very rarely see a piece of mine that's like a single photograph. Like one of the pieces in the Spirit of Place show is a series of 45 photographs that I've put together in almost a triangular shape.
Mm-hmm.
And they're all just of one walk, one day of photographing the waves at Horseneck. It wasn't any spectacular day. It was just a regular day. And so at the very top, there's one photograph. The next one is two photographs. The next one is three.
Okay.
Goes all the way down. So the last one is following a wave over 10 photographs. And so it's this building up of both the visual notion of making a big form out of these photographs.
Mm-hmm.
Also, what was really going on was, can I maintain my concentration to continue to expand it? Because what I noticed was that, and it's really easy if you photograph waves at all,
Mm-hmm.
is you want to catch them at a certain moment.
Oh,
right?
and that's the whole
There's
thing.
that moment that go, oh, that's where I want it to be.
Yeah.
It's just like absurd notion, right?
Yeah.
And really good wave photographers really do get that, right?
Yeah.
And I've certainly wasted way too much time trying to, do my own version of that. But what I began to realize was that what I really like doing in my work is getting after a sense of time. So there's a way in which time and space can get sort of brought together in weird ways where you would never see it quite exactly that way, right? You can never see the beginning of a wave and the end of a wave at the same time in real life.
No.
But photographically, I can make a line where I can have the beginning of the wave and the end of the wave simultaneously. Right. So there's sort of this weird compression.
Almost like stop frames. Yeah.
But I link them together. So you end
exactly.
So it's really a series of lines.
Right.
And it came out of work I did, especially with the sky. Before I did some wave work, I was working in the sky and making these, what I would call skyscapes, where I would take a series of images that you could never see all of that at once, and make these very, very long paintings. I've got one was made out of 12 images, so I think it's 18 inches high and 20 feet long.
Wow.
Is it 20 feet? Something like that. It's 12 images. So 2 feet. Yeah.
12 images. Yeah. So like it's probably
it's like 24 feet long.
Yeah. Because you know, when I was living in Portugal, again, seaside community, totally open ocean. I mean, it's like it opens right to the Atlantic.
Right.
And I would do count waves because there's a rhythm. There's a certain rhythm, and every day I would go, and again, for no other purpose except to capture, to be there. Same thing as what I'm doing at Fort Phoenix, and I had my backpack on, and unbeknownst to me, one of the straps was dangling below the pack, so below my waist, and I'm hunched down, you know, trying to keep my butt out of the water. And I've got my cell phone basically, and I'm counting the waves, and you know, you're waiting because you've got to be. And I think that's a clue of being a good photographer, especially like journalistic photographers. You got to know before you know, because when your brain says, "I think you got to shoot," it's too late. You got to just shoot. You got to just jump that thought, right? So all of a sudden, I see this one coming, and it's like, "Oh shit! I haven't been here long enough to count for the rogues." And all of a sudden this monster starts coming towards me, and I go step backwards to stand up, and wouldn't you know, I step on that damn strap.
Oh yeah.
Flop on my back. I got my hand up in the air with a cell phone so it doesn't get wet.
And you just get wiped out.
And I was totally wiped out, and I'm laughing like a fool, and people staring at me, and they're like, "Oh, he must be American." But yeah, I totally understand that.
It's funny. I got caught by a rogue a few weeks back. I was walking along, and all of a sudden, it wasn't bad. I just got my feet wet. Yeah. But it was like I had the exact same thing. It's like I hadn't been there long enough to like, oh, that's the high point. Yep. Okay.
Yeah. And I tell you, I've got some of my best wave photographs ever were from Boarcos, Figueira da Foz, where I lived in Portugal. It was almost too easy because the sea over there just presents itself. And then the rivulets in the sand after a storm. I mean, it's like sculpture. And again, I'm not a landscape painter, and I'm not even like a realist, photorealist kind of a painter. And again, you know, a photo is a photo. It's a photo unto itself, and it's a tool for other things, but it's not a model, I don't think. You know, like to take a photograph and then copy it.
Oh yeah, it's funny. The only time I have done that, and copying is a really most people would never know I copied it. But I had done a show where I was doing an installation, and these paintings were 6 by 14 feet. Mm-hmm. And wow. I had taken photographs of the sky that were so painterly that I wanted to see if I could paint anywhere close to the painterliness of the sky. It was like, now I know where ink, especially Chinese ink painting, comes from.
Yeah.
Certain skies are just like, they look like ink paintings in motion.
Yeah.
Drive me absolutely crazy, because it's like, I'm going to put effort in. This thing is just like constantly being way better than anything I will ever come close to. Like, why do we do this? But we do. but on that case, I actually had taken a series of photographs as panoramas on my phone. And then once the painterliness failed, I tried to figure out if I could, it was a fail. It was just like, even though I could see it, I could feel it, I couldn't do it. I then ended up using the structure of the photographs very carefully to then replicate a painterly version of these skies. So it was, and ever since then, I've been plagued by photographs. And one of the favorite things I do, and this is how I get around this problem, is I actually paint on the photograph. And so I will turn a photograph into some sort of painterly representation. And it usually involves starting something. And then what I do if I'm working in a small scale is I have a squeegee. And I'll just squeegee right over it. And the resemblances are there. And by the time I'm done, you may see a little of the original photograph, or it becomes something totally different. Because there's not a photographic space as a ground, which is a very different quality of optical space than even a stained, you know, a lot of painters will start with a very thin sort of stain.
Yeah. You work from lean to fat, as the old term used to be. Yeah.
It's a different space quality.
It is. I mean,
and especially at a small scale, you can get like an enormous sort of spatial sense and then work on top of that.
Well, the other thing too is like when you photograph the finished piece, and that's one of the tools that, you know, and we were taught all these different techniques and so on and so forth in school, obviously. But when you I mean, scale is something that a lot of people don't really speak about, especially in painting. But when you photograph something and people have no environmental reference, in other words, it's not above a sofa, so you don't know what the scale is. But you think this sucker has got to be like 12 by 14 feet. And then you look at it and it's like, what? It's so small. So well, it's strong. It's strong.
There's a funny thing. It's a lot of painters who paint large can paint small. What they can't do, and I'm one of them, is you give me a canvas that's 3 by 4 feet, I am just about toast from the very beginning.
Really?
Yes, because of that exact same reason. Because where does your the factuality of the paint start to get? How does it get read? So at that scale, like 3 by 4 feet, the literal scale of the paint all of a sudden takes on a much more important effect than if you're doing a 6 by 14 foot painting.
Yeah, I mean, you got to scale up your brushes too, you know, which means you got to paint pots. It's a whole,
you know, a big painting. If because I've done this where you've got the thing and it's 3/4 drips, but it doesn't look like a drip painting. You just take a chunk of that painting out, and all of a sudden it's like, oh, there's drips and brush marks. Yeah. And so all of a sudden, rather than being a big open field, you've got a painting that's about brush strokes and drips. So the literal scale becomes really critical. So when you're looking at the piece that's behind me, then I think that's 18 by 24 inches. That gets to be a really interesting scale because the factuality of the paint becomes, it has a different primacy. It almost becomes part and parcel of the work itself. And so I think for me, when I was mentioning the idea of doing the seaweed and the accumulation, there I'm seeing something that feels like buildup of in this case, it wasn't paint strokes, but it was sort of an equivalent scale. So it was something that was like, oh, this might have possibilities in a smaller scale than I normally would go to.
Size is interesting, you know, when it comes down to the canvas, because some canvases are so large you can feel like you can walk into them, but then sometimes they're so big that you don't feel a part of it, and yet you go down the opposite end of the scale to the small pieces, and that gets dangerous because they become precious.
Yep.
you know, so this whole thing about scale, my God, the time is like really rolled by. So what can you leave us with? I mean, this has been a wonderful conversation, and I tell people who aren't painters that we definitely don't think like other people do. And there's a reason for it. There's an absolute reason for it. I mean, it's like, you know, my wife is a graphic designer, and you know, it's two different worlds, completely different, you know. So this has been wonderful. So now that you're re-ensconced in the South Coast, just quickly, any plans?
Well, right now I'm getting ready for a show that'll be in Fall River in April, on the Taunton River.
Okay.
I think the title of the show will be Down by the River.
Mhm.
It's a play on the David Byrne song.
Yeah.
Talking Heads. And so I live very near the Taunton River, and my wife has done a big project that goes out into the river.
Mhm.
But that's a very urban aspect of the river, and I'm like, how am I going to make a connection here? And I still am not quite sure. But so what I decided to do one day is, okay, I have no idea what the Taunton River is like up north, you know, and so I decided, well, I am going to find every single bridge that crosses the Taunton River and go do something at that cross point. So where I'm at the moment, I've gone up a couple times, is I decided just to take photographs, bland,
Mhm.
almost like brain dead photographs of looking up the river
Mhm.
and down the river.
From that vantage point.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
so you end up with just this sort of like most of the time, it just looks like wilderness. Even though, you know, there are houses like just
Right.
less than an eighth of a mile away.
Right.
You're in the middle of suburbia, but the wilderness is going right through there, which is
Right.
really interesting because you look at all of them, and it isn't until you get down to, I think, Dighton, that it starts to open up.
Well, that's when you get to the weirs, right?
What
What they refer to as the weirs. Yeah.
area of Taunton,
Mhm.
and that's so urban that that's been sort of almost, you know,
Right.
man.
I was trying to explain that to somebody who lives there but wasn't born there. That from what I know of from, you know, previous family connections, that there's a section. I think it's around where the silver mills were.
Okay.
It's called the weirs, and that's
Yeah.
the weirs section of Taunton.
Yeah.
And they're looking at me like, that's what? But
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, and I think that's really tricky because if you're used to open water weirs,
Hmm.
like, because one of the things when I would first start going up to Grand Manan, they were still doing the herring fishing.
Right.
And so they had the circular weirs. And so when I heard weirs, I thought, what are you talking about? And I had to look it up. And instead of going in circles, it was just going across the river.
Across the river, yeah.
But still the same basic idea of, you know.
Right. And we have one, you know, Duval's General Store. There's that used to be a tan. Well, it was Tanner's Lane. I think there's a tannery there originally. So they were getting water from the river.
Oh, okay.
And there's still a weir there. I mean, there's a ladder there.
Huh.
Yeah. So that's an interesting place for you to visit.
Yeah, I go to
even though it's fresh water. I mean,
that's my geography run is to go from Somerset to the beach, up the Duval's, and then to my studio. So there's my little. But so basically, I'm doing this project where I'm exploring the river, and instead of walking, I'm driving.
Right.
And it's still the idea of getting to know a landscape somehow. And I still don't quite know what the show is going to become, whether it's going to be photographs or painting or
a combination. Yeah, I've been wanting though. Every time I go over the Acushnet River at several different points, I've been asking a friend of mine who's got canoes or kayaks or whatever. I would really love to go to the head of the river, and paddle all the way down, you know, to the harbor.
Yeah.
Because I think that would be, I mean, just in Fairhaven alone, on Sagamore Street, I think it is, or Sycamore Street, which is parallel to the river. The amount of wildlife down there is just absolutely crazy, you know.
Oh, yeah. My studio's on the other side, on the New Bedford side.
Mhm.
And I spend way too much time bird watching across the river because
There's
I
egrets
look
out there, right?
over the area that has just been cleaned and then replanted from the reclamation project.
Yeah, the PCPs, yeah, PC.
Yeah, so that's all
yeah.
now been done on that side, and it is just full of birds. I mean, I was looking just before I sat down, and there must have been, 4 or 5 different species of ducks, and good 20, 30 geese, and
Wow.
I've seen eagle there. And
all right, we got to wrap this up, but we definitely have to make a coffee date or something like that.
Sounds good.
In the next month or so. And one final question: are you driven by, in other words, your motivation to paint? We all have different motivations, but I find I'm like kind of task oriented. In other words, if somebody says, "Hey, I'd like to have a show of your work, but I need 30 pieces by August," I was like, "Yeah, okay," and I'll do it. But if I said to myself, I think I'm going to try to crank out 30 pieces by August, I'll never do it. I don't know why.
What really does it for me is my preference is to know the space before I'm going to paint it.
Yeah.
The only trouble with that is you give me a 20-foot wall, you're going to have an 18-foot long piece.
Yeah. I understand that feeling because I was a set designer once, and we doing 30-foot legs, flats.
Yeah.
That's another story for coffee. Chris Page, thank you so much for being on the show. This was really Painter to Painter. I mean, if we have to subtitle this episode, that's what it'd be, Painter to Painter. I kind of like this, I think, for a future thing on the Artist Index. So, folks, thanks so much for hanging in there with us and listening to two painters talk about painting. What else? and their approaches to life and the passions of painting and so on and so forth. So with that in mind, we'll see you next week, and bye-bye for now. Thanks.
We'll see you next week for another episode of the South Coast Artist Index podcast. To learn more about the South Coast Artist Index, visit theartistindex.com. Find us on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube.